Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Chris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Chris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Chris and Bill Tenney-Britton here today to talk to you about finding the right resource. Hey, it's a virtual jungle out there.
That it
Just
is.
Zoom, Google Meets, MS Teams, Bible Gateway, Bible study tools, Olive Tree, Pastor.com, Barna.com, EffectiveChurch.com.
Well, let's be real. Every church leadership coach, stewardship company, never mind.
ChurchTalk.tv.
Yeah, EffectiveChurch.com and NetResults.org, which are the best, all have their own sites. It gets very confusing.
And if you do a Google search for resources,
goodness.
Pastoral resources or church resources, there are literally 135 million or more resources that is happy to tell you we're the top one. You need to come and see our stuff.
Guess how he knows that? Yeah.
Yeah, because he searches for that kind of stuff all the time. That's right. All right, so today we have Paul Borden with Wooddale Advance. He's back with us today. He has got some great stuff to share with us about online resource. And Paul,
Welcome.
welcome.
So glad you're here.
Good to be here. Thank you very much.
All right.
thank
So
you.
let me just jump into the question. So what are the benefits of using virtual resources as opposed to in-person resources?
Well, I think the benefits are the same benefits that we have found when it comes to shopping or other ways that we now get merchandise or services online, in the sense that there are all kinds of options. It's also less expensive. In the church world this year, we have realized that we can do meetings by Zoom. We can even do worship services by streaming and other ways, and have access to a number of different kinds of devices. And so one of the biggest benefits is not only do you have all these options, but then you also can save on cost. In fact, last year, in the midst of the pandemic, I actually did a church consultation with a smaller congregation across the country. And although it was not ideal in every way, they were able to do it. And it was far less costly for them because of transportation and all the other expenses that go with in person. This does not mean you don't need in person, but you still have all those benefits that we experience when we do shopping or other things.
Paul, one of the things that I was thinking, that it's the first time in the history of humanity that the church has an opportunity to reach from our desktop, our laptop, our cell phone to the ends of the earth. We can literally, from wherever we are, reach people for Jesus Christ anywhere in the world. And that's never been a possibility before.
Yes. In fact, last year I was listening to a person from a large church in Australia. They talked about how they did their Christmas Eve service 37 times in a row to hit all the different time zones and different times of the day.
Wow.
And part of that was to minister to a congregation that they have online that's in the Middle East. And they have been able to serve them and minister to them.
Wow. Incredible.
It is. So, Paul, there are all these resources that are out there. They're available to the majority of congregations, ministers. I'm thinking, why don't we see any lasting change?
Excellent question. And I would like to suggest at least three major reasons. One is because it is the internet. Anybody can put anything online for the most part that they want to. And so sometimes I think with churches, maybe God does something, a good experience happens, and they say, oh, we now have a resource to give to congregations. They put the resource on, talk about it, but not understanding really why it happened, how it happened, maybe they are unique when it comes to what God is doing in other churches. But because we have access to all this material, we have to realize that there isn't there really isn't a filter to say this is good, this is better, this is poor. That relates to the second issue, which is, again, the same problem in all the issues around the internet. There's no editors. When I sit down to write my books, I had to get past an editor. There had to be rewriting. I was questioned sometimes, how do you support that? That's not true on the internet. I mean, if you put it up there and you can say this is the truth, and people have no way of knowing whether it is the truth or whether it isn't. However, I think the biggest problem is, and I'd like to use an analogy, we recognize that our bodies are very complex entities. When God created us, he took something which was very complex and put it together. And when our bodies function well, it is awesome. But when they're not functioning well, then we need help from someone who understands our bodies. And so we hopefully go to the right doctor who understands. You're just talking about symptoms. You're not talking about root causes. Well, on the internet today, there's all kinds of information, some of it excellent, some of it not as excellent, about what to do when certain things happen. And so people will often go on the internet and say, oh, I'm going to get these pills, I'm going to do this exercise, I'm going to go on this diet, and maybe realize that in the process, they're not only not helping their bodies, they may even be harming the bodies. I think the same thing happens with churches. A lot of people look at the church and say, oh, I know what our problem is, or when I was growing up, this is what our church did, or when we attended that large church before we moved here, they did this. And so they look on the internet and try to, in a sense, self-medicate and say, this is what we ought to do. When most of the times, the things that are being treated might be symptoms, but you're not dealing with the causes. You're not understanding what's interrelated. You're not understanding how things work together. And so often when I will work with churches and I'll talk about ideas, they'll say, well, we tried that idea 2 years ago, or we tried that idea, or I haven't had churches say every year. I mean, it's almost like the ministry cure du jour. This is what we're going to do this year. This is what we're going to do next year, et cetera. And they don't realize that they are just taking things piecemeal and dealing often with symptoms. And again, because there's no editing, it may be things that will ultimately harm the body, or at least make it even more ineffective. So I think the problem is the fact that we often think, well, I go to church, I've been in church all my life, I know what the church needs, when in reality, we really don't know what the church needs. And this is where you need people who understand what it's like to do church in the 21st century. And a lot of churches are using symptoms that may have worked in the 20th century or even the 18th century, but this is the 21st century. And I think that's a major reason why a lot of times things don't work.
So what we need really, I think, is a curated place to go to find and get all the materials, or at least find materials that have been edited, or at least, as I said, curated, that says this is these things are helpful. These are from people who know what they're talking about. What are you looking at me like that for?
That's why we need consultants.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. So let me get to the question. Paul, where are those places to go?
Well, I'd like to even narrow it down further, is where do we start? Because obviously, if a church is a complicated entity, there are a number of things that you might need to do. One of the questions I have often asked of pastors, church boards, even denominational leaders, I say, let's suppose that a pastor goes to a congregation that's been in plateau or decline for 5, 10, maybe even 15 years or longer. And the people say to the pastor, we're tired of this situation, and we're losing people, and things aren't happening. Whatever you tell us to do for the next 2 years, we will do it. We will not question it. We will not complain about it. We will put our best effort forward to do it. Whatever it is, tell us what to do and we'll do it. And then I look at pastors, I look at church boards, and I say, if this was your church, would you know what to do? And it's amazing I've done this now for years and years, and they all say, I really wouldn't know what to do. Maybe we try to preach better. We might try to sing better. We might try to have small groups better, but we really don't know what to do. So as I have worked with congregations, most of them in plateau or decline, most of them small, I have started from that perspective of, if you wanted to start over, what would you do? And so when I was asked to become the director of Wooddale Advance, which is a ministry of Wooddale Church, I literally put together a virtual tool. It's a 5-hour or 5-session streaming video, if you will, that assumes that the church wants to start over. And what do you do? Now, you can't deal with everything. You can't deal with some other things that, if these things work, you will then have to face. But what do you do? And to be very honest about it, Bill, I'm not sure I find many resources are done that way. Now, I think there are some very quality people who really edit, who know what they're doing. They, in a sense, are consultants. But I often sit down and say, all right, if I do that, what about all of this? Or how do we start over? And so the one tool I do know about, simply because I've created it and because I have found success in working with churches of 20 or 50 or 100 that really have said, okay, we're going to start over. This is what we're going to do. I have found this is an excellent tool. So the seminar is called Leading Congregational Transformation, and it's on wooddale.org/advance, that website. That's what we're doing. And I would say that's the question you have to ask. If we were to start over and everyone says we're going to work together, there's not going to be any resistance, there's not going to be any fight, what would we do? And I find this really begins to eliminate many of the resources that are out there. Now, some of those resources can be helpful if you've got some momentum, if you've got some things happening. But if you want to know how to start over, I just find there really is not much out there about that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no.
And the URL is right there.
Yep.
And you can get the Wooddale Advance that way. And we put the direct email, the direct URL right there in the description, so you can go directly there. All right, Paul, any last words, last thoughts?
Well, all I want to say is I am encouraged, often as I have talked to some consultants, some denominational leaders, pastors, many people think, gee, if we get down to a small church, we've been around for maybe even 100 years, but now we're down there, there's no hope. I have found there is lots of hope. And one of the things I enjoy the most is seeing churches that used to be 20 or 50 not only grow and become, many of them break the 200 barrier eventually. It takes some time, but they grow by making disciples for Jesus Christ. And pastors finally get to pastor the kind of church they thought they would pastor before they went to seminary. That's where I get my fulfillment in terms of what I do.
How
awesome.
Exciting. We forget sometimes that we're people of hope.
Yes.
We're
yes.
to be people of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
only
time.
God grows.
Nope.
Only
Right.
God grows the church. But if that's true, then if your church isn't growing, you have to ask why.
Yes.
Right. Awesome. So we're almost out of time.
We are.
But I want to talk about the newest issue of
Yes.
Net Results magazine on church finance. We have an article there from Paul as well. And we want to head you over to netresults.org to grab your copy.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul, thanks so much for
you
being with
so
us.
much.
We'll have you
Thank
back
You're
again
welcome.
soon.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Was
And
being a-
thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks all. We'll
Bye-bye.
see you next week.
Have a great week.